There's a particular kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot cure. It's the bone-deep weariness that comes from absorbing everyone else's emotions, from carrying conversations no one else remembers, from seeing patterns that remain invisible to others. It's the fatigue of being a lighthouse in a world that has grown comfortable with darkness. If you've ever walked into a room and immediately felt the weight of unspoken tensions, if you've ever known something about someone before they said a word, if you've ever been called too sensitive by people who don't feel enough, you might be looking into the mirror of the INFJ soul. You might be one of the rarest personality types, the mystic, the advocate, the counselor, representing just 1 to 3% of humanity. This isn't about supernatural powers or spiritual gifts. This is about possessing a mind that perceives reality through layers most people never access, a heart that feels with an intensity that borders on overwhelming, and a soul that refuses to accept surface when depth is possible. This is the psychology of the INFJ, and if you recognize yourself here, you're about to understand why you've always felt like a stranger in your own world. To understand the INFJ is to witness a mind that experiences reality through layers of meaning invisible to most. Imagine walking through life wearing glasses that reveal not just what people say, but what they mean, what they fear, what they hide beneath their carefully constructed masks. At the heart of the INFJ's mental architecture lies what psychologists call introverted intuition, their dominant cognitive function. This isn't simply about gut feelings or vague hunches. It's about possessing an internal telescope that perceives patterns across time, seeing how the threads of past, present, and future weave together into inevitable outcomes. Picture this. You're sitting in a cafe with a friend who's excitedly telling you about their new relationship. They're describing all the wonderful qualities of their partner, the romantic gestures, the intense connection. But as an INFJ, you're hearing something else entirely. You're noticing the subtle tension in their voice when they mention how their partner handles conflict. You're seeing the pattern that matches 3 previous relationships that ended in heartbreak. You're perceiving the trajectory of this story before it's fully written. This cognitive function operates like a sophisticated pattern recognition system running continuously in the background, synthesizing information from multiple sources: body language, tone of voice, what's said, what's not said, micro-expressions that flash across faces in milliseconds. It's why INFJs often just know things without being able to explain their reasoning. Their intuition has already processed 1,000 data points before their conscious mind has registered what's happening. But this gift of perception carries a devastating burden. When you can see the car crash coming before it happens, when you recognize toxic patterns before they fully manifest, when you perceive someone's pain beneath their smile, you become a witness to truths that others refuse to acknowledge. The very insight that makes you valuable makes you unbearably lonely.
But the INFJ's second cognitive function, extraverted feeling, transforms this already intense experience into something even more overwhelming. While their intuition perceives patterns and meanings, their feeling function makes them absorb the emotions of everyone around them, like a sponge soaking up water. This isn't empathy in the way most people experience it. This is emotional absorption. INFJs don't just understand how others feel, they literally feel it in their own bodies. Walk into a room where two people recently argued, and the INFJ feels the tension like static electricity on their skin. Sit with someone who's masking their depression, and the INFJ absorbs that heaviness into their own chest. As psychology researcher Susan Bialy-Haas describes it, emotional empaths absorb others' feelings much like a sponge. For INFJs, this creates an exhausting reality. They wake up carrying not just their own emotional weight, but the accumulated pain, anxiety, and unexpressed feelings of everyone they encounter. Sitting with a friend who's going through a difficult time, and hours later still feeling that person's sadness as if it were their own. Confronting someone about a boundary violation and then absorbing that person's hurt feelings so intensely that they want to take back everything they said just to relieve the emotional pressure. This emotional absorption serves a profound purpose. It makes INFJs extraordinary counselors, healers, and advocates. They can meet people exactly where they are emotionally, because they're not just observing emotions from the outside, they're experiencing them from within. But it also creates a psychological vulnerability that few other personality types face. The INFJ becomes a dumping ground for other people's problems. People sense their emotional availability, their non-judgmental presence, their deep capacity to understand. So they unload trauma, drama, complaints, fears, and the INFJ, with their helper's heart and their inability to turn away from suffering, absorbs it all.
But here's where the INFJ psychology becomes even more complex. Despite this intense emotional sensitivity, most INFJs move through the world wearing carefully constructed masks, performing versions of themselves designed to make others comfortable. INFJs are called chameleons for good reason. Their extraverted feeling function makes them acutely aware of social dynamics, emotional atmospheres, and what others need or expect from them. So they adapt, they mirror, they become what the situation requires. At work, they're the professional colleague who's pleasant and approachable but reveals nothing personal. With family, they're the peacemaker who smooths over conflicts and never rocks the boat. With friends, they're different versions of themselves depending on which friend group they're with, adjusting their humor, their interests, their energy to match what each group expects. This isn't deception, it's survival. From childhood, many INFJs learned that their true intensity, their depth of perception, their emotional sensitivity made others uncomfortable. They were told they were too much or too sensitive. They were dismissed when they tried to share their intuitive insights. They learned to hide their light to avoid rejection. Clinical psychologist and INFJ specialist Dr. Lauren Sapala describes this as living in a performative role, constantly adjusting themselves to meet others' expectations rather than expressing their authentic nature. The tragedy is that this performance becomes so automatic that many INFJs lose touch with who they actually are beneath the masks. The exhaustion of maintaining these different personas is crushing. Imagine never being able to fully relax into your authentic self, always monitoring, adjusting, performing. By the end of each day, the INFJ has expended enormous energy on this emotional labor with nothing left for themselves. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about individuals who had transcended conventional thinking, but found themselves wandering in a wilderness of their own making. INFJs embody this paradox. They are simultaneously the most relational and the most private of all personality types. Consider these contradictions that INFJs hold within themselves. They are intensely empathetic, yet capable of complete emotional detachment. They can sit with someone for hours, absorbing their pain, offering profound understanding.
But when their boundaries are repeatedly violated, when their empathy is exploited, they possess the ability to shut down emotionally with a finality that seems almost cold. This is the infamous INFJ door slam, not an act of cruelty, but an act of survival. They are deeply idealistic, yet painfully pragmatic. INFJs carry visions of how the world could be, more just, more compassionate, more conscious. They believe in human potential with a faith that borders on spiritual. Yet they navigate the world as it actually exists with shrewd realism, understanding human psychology well enough to work within current systems, while dreaming of transforming them. They crave authentic connection, yet need extensive solitude. The INFJ longs for relationships where they can drop their masks, where they can be truly seen and understood. Yet after social interaction, even positive interaction, they need days of solitude to process what they absorbed, to separate their own emotions from others, to return to themselves. They appear confident in their insights, yet struggle with profound self-doubt. When an INFJ's intuition speaks, it speaks with certainty. They know things, they see patterns with crystal clarity. Yet they simultaneously doubt their own worth, question whether they have anything valuable to offer, wonder if they're enough. These aren't contradictions that need to be resolved. They're the essence of what makes INFJs so beautifully complex. They are walking paradoxes, containing multitudes that would tear apart less nuanced personalities.
The INFJ door slam is perhaps the most dramatic and misunderstood aspect of this personality type. To outsiders, it appears sudden. One day the INFJ is present, warm, engaged, and the next day they've vanished completely, cutting off all contact without explanation or second chances. But this perception of suddenness is an illusion, born from not seeing the internal process that led to this moment. The door slam doesn't happen impulsively. It's the final stage of a long, agonizing process that has been unfolding for months or years. First comes the period of dealing with toxicity. The INFJ, with their deep capacity for understanding and their belief in human potential, tries to work through problems. They make excuses for the other person's behavior. They try to see things from every perspective. They give chance after chance because they believe people can change, and they can see the best in others, even when others can't see it in themselves. But gradually, after repeated boundary violations, after their empathy is exploited or taken for granted, after they've absorbed so much emotional pain from this relationship that it's affecting their health, something shifts. The INFJ begins what psychologists call emotional detachment. This isn't a conscious decision. It's a survival mechanism activating to protect them from further harm. During this recuperation period, the INFJ becomes increasingly numb to the relationship. They're still present physically, but emotionally they've begun to withdraw. They're processing, deciding, preparing themselves for what comes next. And then the door slams. Complete, final, absolute. All contact severed. No explanation, no second chance, no going back. To the person on the receiving end, this can feel brutal, even cruel. But for the INFJ, it's the only way to preserve their psychological survival. Here's the most important thing to understand about the INFJ door slam. When an INFJ slams the door on you, they don't hate you. Hatred would require ongoing emotional investment. Instead, they nothing you. The emotion they feel toward you is absence, a void where connection once existed, and that void, that emotional neutrality, is far more final than hatred could ever be.
Why are INFJs so naturally drawn to spirituality, mysticism, and questions of ultimate meaning? This isn't coincidental or performative, it's intrinsic to their cognitive architecture. Their dominant introverted intuition naturally perceives beyond surface reality. They see connections between events that seem unrelated. They notice synchronicities that others dismiss as coincidence. They sense meanings beneath material existence that pull them toward exploration of the invisible, the transcendent, the eternal. From early in life, many INFJs report feeling called towards something greater, sensing that material reality is only part of a larger truth. They're drawn to philosophy, depth psychology, metaphysics, dream analysis, and spiritual practices that explore the depths of human existence and the nature of consciousness itself. This spiritual orientation isn't about escaping reality. It's about perceiving more of reality than most people access. INFJs think in symbols and metaphors. They recognize archetypal patterns playing out in individual lives. They ask the questions that make others uncomfortable. What is the purpose of suffering? What lies beyond death? How should we live in light of our mortality? The Greek myth of Cassandra tells of a prophet cursed to see the future accurately, but never be believed. This is the psychological burden that many INFJs carry. Their intuition allows them to perceive how situations will likely unfold, to recognize patterns that will inevitably lead to certain outcomes. But when they try to warn others, they're dismissed as overthinking, being too negative, or imagining problems that don't exist. Imagine watching a friend stay in a toxic relationship, seeing exactly how it will end, recognizing all the warning signs that they're blind to. You try to express your concerns gently, but you're told you're being judgmental or that you don't understand. Then, months or years later, the relationship implodes in exactly the way you foresaw. There's no satisfaction in being right, only sadness at suffering that could have been prevented if someone had listened. This happens in every area of the INFJ's life. They perceive problems in organizational structures before those problems become crises. They recognize when someone is heading toward burnout or breakdown. They see the ethical issues in business practices that others rationalize away. But in a world that values immediate results over long-term sustainability, efficiency over meaning, their insights are often dismissed. The INFJ becomes the Cassandra of the modern world, cursed with accurate perception that no one believes until it's too late. This creates a unique form of suffering. It's not just the loneliness of seeing what others don't see, it's the helplessness of watching predictable disasters unfold while being powerless to prevent them. In a world increasingly dominated by performance, curated social media personas, superficial networking, transactional relationships, INFJs feel the inauthenticity like a physical pain. They cannot pretend without experiencing deep psychological distress. Their introverted intuition compels them toward truth, while their introverted thinking demands logical consistency between their values and their actions. This creates unique challenges in every domain of life. In the workplace, while others can compartmentalize and separate their personal values from professional roles, INFJs struggle with work that feels meaningless or ethically questionable. They're the ones asking uncomfortable questions in meetings, pointing out elephants in rooms, refusing to participate in corporate doublespeak or office politics. They need their work to matter, not just to pay bills or provide status, but to contribute something meaningful to the world. In a society that often systematically strips meaning from work, reducing human beings to productivity metrics, the INFJ experiences this meaninglessness as a form of spiritual death. Their relationships must be authentic. Surface-level friendships, while they can maintain them with apparent ease, leave INFJs feeling empty and exhausted. They crave depth, conversations that explore ideas, emotions, and truths that actually matter. Small talk isn't just boring for INFJs, it's actively painful, like being forced to speak a language their mind isn't designed to process fluently.
Carl Jung wrote extensively about the archetype of the wounded healer, the person who has been broken by life's challenges, but transforms that brokenness into a source of healing for others. The INFJ embodies this archetype perhaps more than any other personality type. Jung himself discovered this archetype through his own psychological struggles. Quote, "A good half of every treatment that probes at all deeply consists in the doctor's examining himself. It is his own hurt that gives a measure of his power to heal." End quote. For INFJs, their wounds, their lifetime of feeling misunderstood, their experience of absorbing others' pain, their deep sensitivity in a harsh world become the very source of their healing power. The INFJ's wounds often begin in childhood. They were the child who felt everything too deeply, who noticed tensions that adults tried to hide, who asked questions that made everyone uncomfortable. They learned early that their intensity, their sensitivity, their depth made others uneasy, so they learned to hide, to perform, to make themselves smaller. But these wounds, properly integrated, become gifts. The INFJ who has felt the sting of rejection becomes skilled at creating safe spaces for others who feel different. The one who has absorbed the world's pain learns to sit with others' suffering without trying to fix it or flee from it. The one who has been dismissed for their depth learns to appreciate and nurture depth in others. This transformation from wounded to healer isn't automatic. It requires what Jung called individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of the self, including shadow parts we'd rather deny. The INFJ must learn to embrace their sensitivity as strength, their intensity as a gift, their depth as treasure rather than burden. But they must also learn to set boundaries to protect their own well-being, to refuse to be depleted by others' needs. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the wounded healer's journey, learning to give without exhausting themselves, to love without losing themselves, to help without sacrificing their own psychological survival.